Imagine yourself in the year 1778 on the frontier settlements of America when you and other men from your community, while hunting for food and supplies, stumble into a force of over 100 Shawnee warriors on their way to attack the very settlement you just came from. Knowing a fight would mean extermination for your party, you surrender. Miles later in the Shawnee village, completely naked, you're standing before two parallel lines of Shawnee warriors, women, and children. You will be forced to run between them as you're assaulted by rocks, clubs, and sticks to determine if you're brave and worthy enough to live. This trial became a reality for legendary frontiersman Daniel Boone and 30 other men in February 1778. Running the gauntlet is a form of trial or punishment that dates back to the early 1600s in Sweden, but could go back all the way to the ancient Greek and Roman empires. It's a form of punishment where a guilty party would be forced to run between two rows of soldiers who attacked with sticks or other weapons. In some cases, completing the gauntlet would forgive a person of their crime, but in other instances, it was used as a form of execution, the victims being stabbed or beaten to death, even having to restart if they made it through alive. It was seen as a more honorable execution than being hanged. Being forced to run the gauntlet was a very real possibility for any French, English, or American settler captured by the eastern woodland tribes of North America. The gauntlet was just one of many torture methods inflicted upon native or white enemies. The gauntlet, however, offered a chance of survival upon completing it bravely. This was not always the case. Captives seen as cowards or weaklings were often killed. But this was not the case for Daniel Boone and his men. They were able to complete the gauntlet and were adopted into the tribe. Once adopted into a tribe, captives were generally treated no different than any other member. The Shawnee had a tradition of adopting prisoners of war to replace sons killed in battle. Boone is rumored to have been adopted by the famed chief Blackfish, who had another legendary adopted son, the Shawnee Tecumseh, who would go on to become one of the greatest Native American leaders in recorded history, and to fight in skirmishes against Daniel Boone on more than one occasion. But that's another story. Boone lived with the Shawnee for months, going by the name Shell-Towee, meaning big turtle. But after discovering that Blackfish was planning to attack Fort Boonesborough, he escaped with his men, later going on to lead an attack in Indian land against the Shawnee. The next account is of a Connecticut-born young man named Agrippa Wells, who was born in 1738. In 1757, Agrippa was a 19-year-old member of the Rogers Rangers, fighting in the French and Indian War. The Rogers Rangers were a unit commanded by Captain Robert Rogers and were famous for their bravery and effectiveness. They were experts in fighting in mountains and wooded areas. They were England's primary scouting unit in the 1750s. In June of 1757, Agrippa Wells was captured by Delaware natives while scouting Sabbath Day Point at the base of Lake George in New York. They took him north into Canada and forced him to run the gauntlet. This is his first-hand account. On approaching the fort, through large numbers of naked painted savages who were formed into two long ranks, I was obliged to run the gauntlet. I was told that if I ran quick, it would be so much better, as they would quit when I got to the end of the ranks. I started in the race with all the vigor and resolution I was capable of exerting. When I had got near the end of the lines, I was struck to the ground with a stick or the handle of a tomahawk. On recovering my senses, I endeavored to renew the race, but as I rose, someone threw sand in my eyes, which blinded me so that I could not see where to run. They continued beating me until I was insensible, but before I lost consciousness, I remember wishing they would strike the final blow, for I thought they intended killing me, and that they were taking too long about it. I was sent to the hospital and carefully tended by a French doctor, and recovered quicker than I expected. I asked a Delaware Indian who could speak some English if I had done anything to offend them which caused them to beat me so unmercifully. No, he replied. It was only an old custom the Indians had, and was like, "How do you do?" After this, he said, "You will be well used." Agrippa was reported to have kicked and injured a woman towards the end of his gauntlet and impressed his captors. He was eventually exchanged and sent to France, then England, and finally back to his home in Massachusetts. Agrippa Wells would continue his career as a soldier and go on to participate in Shays' Rebellion in 1786, and in 1809 he died at the age of 71. The next story is about a man named Simon Kenton. Kenton was an American frontiersman and soldier. He was a friend of Daniel Boone and had saved his life in the past. But his experience with the Gauntlet was far more torturous than Boone's. In the fall of 1778, Kenton and 2 other men set out to get back horses that the Shawnee had stolen. Being successful, they made it back to the Ohio River, which was at the time the border between Indian and settler land. Looking for a place to cross, they were attacked by a war party of Shawnee on horseback, led by Bo Na. One man was immediately killed and scalped, with Kenton being taken and the other man escaping to the woods. The Shawnee were aware of who Kenton was and knew that he was a well-respected settler and had fought against the Shawnee on multiple occasions. First, Kenton was tied by the neck on the back of an unbroken horse, facing up. They then whipped the horse and it took off into the trees, the branches scratching his face and body. If he lost his balance and fell off the horse, he would have been strangled to death. Somehow he stayed on the horse until it stopped. The next day, he would be stripped and forced to run the gauntlet. He was set before 2 lines of almost the whole village, children and women in the front, and men in the back. He was told if he could make it to the council house at the end of the lines, he would be safe. He ran, taking vicious blows the whole way. Almost finished, he was tripped by a blow to the back of his legs and beaten on the ground until he was unconscious. When he woke, he was forced to run it again. Surviving this, Bo Na paraded Kenton around to other Shawnee villages, where he was forced to run a gauntlet at each village. When he reached Macacheek, a large Shawnee village located in present-day Logan County, Ohio, he decided to escape. During his newest gauntlet, he charged straight into an old woman, knocking her down and running into the woods. Surprising everyone, he was making good ground. But with the worst of luck, he ran straight into a war party led by the famous Chief Blue Jacket, who was coming to the village. Blue Jacket rode Kenton down and hit him with the blunt end of his tomahawk, putting a hole in his skull. Somehow surviving, Kenton was unconscious for days. After awakening, he was taken to the home of Black Hoof, the principal chief of the Shawnee. There it was decided that Kenton would run one more gauntlet before being burned alive. After running a final time, tied to a stake and painted black, there was no hope for escape, until a rainstorm drenched the stake Kenton was tied to. His burning was put off a day. It was the next day Simon Girty rode into the village as part of a Shawnee war party. Simon Kenton and Simon Girty had known each other for years and had become blood brothers and had sworn loyalty to each other. Girty had been taken by the Shawnee at a young age and raised by them. He had returned to white society, but with the outbreak of the Revolutionary War had chosen to side with his adopted tribe and the British. Because of this, he had become hated among the colonies. They called him the White Savage, and he was hunted by the Americans. Although years had passed, Girty recognized Kenton underneath the black paint and ran to him at the stake. Girty begged tribal elders to let his longtime friend free. The tribe held a debate and a vote, and Kenton was freed and treated as an honored guest. Warriors gathered around him, shook hands with him, and called him brother. Kenton was adopted by an old woman to replace a son killed in battle. Kenton enjoyed only 3 weeks of freedom when a war party returned to the village, having lost warriors, and decided that Kenton's death sentence should be upheld. Furious at all Americans, Girty could do nothing. The place of his execution was set to be Sandusky, 50 miles away, so members of other tribes could attend. On the way, a warrior hit Kenton so hard with his war club he broke his arm. Later, another warrior fractured his collarbone with an axe. Arriving at Sandusky, he was forced to run the gauntlet for a final time, before being tied naked to the ground at night. However, the Shawnee chief Logan, who had befriended Kenton years before, had sent a runner to the British fort at Detroit. On the day planned for his death, a white man in a British uniform appeared in the village. He was Pierre Drouard, and he was the man Chief Logan had sent for. Giving a speech, he asked the Shawnee to give the British Army their captive as he was valuable to them, and in exchange they would have $100 credit to use on whatever they wanted, and that Kenton would eventually be returned to them. The Shawnees agreed. At the fort, Kenton got the medical aid he needed and was allowed to roam the town, but he was still technically a prisoner. He was allowed to attend council meetings where he saw various tribal allies of the British turn in patriot American scalps for bounty. Being prisoner for months, Kenton was planning his escape. He met a Detroit merchant who helped them get supplies, including a rifle, powder, shot, moccasins, and deer and buffalo jerky, which he hid in a tree outside of the fort. With 2 other prisoners, he headed west before going south to avoid being captured by Indians again. After a full 30 days and 400 miles of travel through wild wilderness, Simon Kenton, in July of 1778, finally made it home.